My parents tried to have me declared criminally unfit so they could steal my $450,000 car collection and use it to buy my sister a house. Can you believe your own parents would try to legally steal everything you could ever? I'm Ethan, and for 11 years I poured my heart and soul into building a classic car collection worth nearly $500,000 only for my family to declare me mentally incompetent all to bail out my sister. It was a betrayal so profound it changed my life forever. Growing up in suburban Detroit, cars weren't just a hobby, they were my escape. I was only 8 when my uncle handed me my first model car, a beautiful 1967 Mustang fastback replica. While other kids tore their toys apart, I meticulously cared for mine, lining them up perfectly on a shelf above my bed. By 12, I'd built over 30 models from scratch, each a testament to a growing passion my family just didn't understand. On the surface, we looked like a normal family. My dad, Richard, was an accountant. Steady income, steady stream of criticism. He was methodical, controlling in ways I only recognized as abnormal when I got older. My mom, Diane, a former elementary school teacher, dedicated herself to raising my sister Margaret and me. But the dynamic was always clear. Margaret could do no wrong. I was constantly pushed to try harder. Margaret, 3 years younger, somehow commanded every spotlight. A B- for her was cause for celebration. My straight A's, they just led to questions about why I wasn't doing more extracurriculars. I told myself it was normal, but deep down I felt the sting of that constant comparison. My fascination with cars only intensified. By 16, I was spending weekends at local garages, soaking up knowledge from mechanics who actually appreciated my curiosity. I saved every dollar from mowing lawns and shoveling snow, pouring it into tools and car parts. My parents dismissed it as a phase, something I'd outgrow when it was time for a real career, accounting for law. My father would lecture at dinner. Those are fields with security. He never once asked what I wanted. Senior year, I defied them, applying to automotive engineering programs. When the acceptance letter from Michigan Institute of Technology arrived, my mother cried, not from pride, but from sheer disappointment. "We just want what's best for you," she'd said. But I knew what she meant was what they thought was best. Meanwhile, Margaret announced she wanted to study international business, and my parents immediately began discussing how they'd finance her education abroad. The difference in treatment was stark, but I learned to live with it. I finally moved out at 21 after a particularly explosive argument. My father had found my business plan for a restoration shop, and in a fit of rage literally tore it to shreds. "This is not what walkers do," he declared, his voice cold and hard. "We build stable careers, not frivolous dreams about old cars." That night, I packed my bags and moved into a tiny apartment above a garage where I'd been working part-time. The owner, Frank, became more of a father to me than Richard ever was. He taught me not just about cars, but about believing in myself. Starting with basic maintenance jobs, I squirreled away every penny. By 25, I had enough to rent a small shop space and classic revival restorations. Was born. Those first 2 years were brutal. 16-hour days were the norm. Sometimes I slept on a cot in the back room. But slowly, word spread about my meticulous attention to detail and my deep knowledge of vintage vehicles. My personal car collection started almost by accident. A client couldn't afford the full restoration of a stunning 1973 Corvette Stingray. We struck a deal. I'd finished the restoration in exchange for partial ownership. 6 months later, he needed cash and sold me his remaining stake. That Stingray became the cornerstone of what would eventually be my 5-ect car collection. Over the next 7 years, I added 4 more. A powerful 1969 Dodge Charger, a sleek 1965 Shelby Cobra replica, a classic 1971 DATS and 240Z, and my absolute pride and joy, fully restored 1962 Ferrari 250 GTA. Each one represented countless hours of work, research, and pure, unadulterated passion. Together, they were worth around $450,000. But to me, they were absolutely priceless. Throughout those years, my relationship with my family remained cordial but distant. Holiday gatherings were always stilted affairs where my growing success was acknowledged, yes, but almost always minimized. My father would introduce me as Ethan. He fixes old cars while Margaret was always my daughter, the international marketing consultant. The fact that her company had gone through 3 rounds of layoffs, and she narrowly escaped, each one was conveniently never mentioned. I accepted this dynamic because honestly, I had built a life I was incredibly proud of. Regardless of their approval, my business was thriving. I had a collection I loved, and I surrounded myself with friends who genuinely valued me. I had no idea that my success would soon trigger a chain of events that would reveal just how far my family would go to control me. Around my 30th birthday, the family dynamic began to shift again. Margaret, now 27, Pat had married Wesley Armstrong, a real estate agent with grand ambitions, but let's just say limited success. They made a striking pair at family gatherings, always dressed in designer clothes, always discussing their latest luxury purchases. Despite Margaret's consistently mediocre career, progression, and Wesley's wildly inconsistent commissions, they somehow maintained an appearance of wealth that even my parents seemed impressed by. Their wedding 3 years earlier had been an extravagant affair at one of Detroit's most exclusive venues. I later learned my parents had actually remortgaged their home to pay for it. The very thing they told me was financially irresponsible when I'd asked for a $5,000 loan to expand my business. I'd gotten a bank loan instead, which I'd paid off 2 years ahead of schedule. 6 months after they married, Margaret and Wesley bought a 5-bedroom house in Bloomfield Hills, one of Michigan's most expensive neighborhoods. It had a 3-car garage that remained stubbornly empty despite Wesley's constant talk about buying luxury vehicles. It had an indoor pool in a guest house larger than my entire apartment. At the housewarming party, Wesley boasted about getting an incredible deal, though he was always vague about the details. Margaret pulled me aside that evening, champagne glass in hand. "It must be hard for you," she'd say, her voice dripping with rehearsed, condescending sympathy, living in that tiny place while working on other people's dream cars. "I like my place," I'd replied honestly, "and some of those cars are mine." She'd laughed as if I told a joke. "Those old things. Wesley's looking at a new Maserati next month. Now that's a real car collection." I didn't even bother explaining the difference between a collection of historic appreciating classics and depreciating luxury cars bought on credit. Some people just never understand the true value of what you build with your own hands and heart. As months passed, Margaret's veiled comments about my cars evolved into open envy. At a family barbecue, after several glasses of wine, she cornered me. "You know what's unfair?" She slurred slightly. "You have 5 cars for one person, and Wesley and I are sharing one between us because we put everything into our home." "That was your choice," I pointed out, trying to keep my voice even. "And my cars are also my business. People see my collection and they trust that I know what I'm doing with theirs." She rolled her eyes. "Mom and Dad think it's weird too. Who needs 5 cars? It's like hoarding, but with expensive things." Thanksgiving that year marked a true turning point. Margaret announced she'd been laid off from her marketing position, quickly assuring everyone it was corporate restructuring, not performance-related. Wesley was unusually quiet about his real estate prospects. When the conversation turned to my recent feature in Classic Car magazine, Margaret abruptly changed the subject. "Speaking of classics," she interrupted, "the classics department at Wesley's alma mater is having a fundraiser. We've pledged $10,000. She smiled proudly while my parents nodded approvingly. Later, as I helped my mother with dishes, she casually mentioned that Margaret and Wesley were having a temporary cash flow issue, but were too proud to ask for help. The implication was painfully clear. "I'm not in a position to lend money right now," I said firmly. "Business expansion takes capital." My mother's expression hardened. "Family should come first. Ethan, your sister would do it for you." Despite my better judgment, I eventually agreed to lend Margaret $5,000 to tie him over. She promised to repay me within 3 months. That money, predictably, was never repaid and never mentioned again. By spring, rumors circulated within the family that Margaret and Wesley were in serious financial trouble. My cousin Alice, who worked at a local bank, hinted that their mortgage was underwater. They bought at the absolute peak with minimal down payment, she whispered at a family gathering, and their adjustable rate is about to reset much higher. 2 weeks later, received an urgent text from my father. Family. Emergency, come to our house tonight. When I arrived, Margaret was readied from crying. Wesley paced nervously, and my parents sat solemnly at their dining table like judges at a tribunal. We need to discuss a family matter. My father began once I sat down. Margaret and Wesley are facing foreclosure on their home. They need approximately $400,000 to clear their debts and retain their property. There was an expectant, heavy silence as everyone stared at me. The implication was so outrageous, so audacious that I actually laughed, which was clearly the wrong response. This is not funny, Ethan. My mother snapped, her voice tight with anger. Your sister could lose her home. I don't have that kind of liquid cash, I said, regaining my composure. My business is assetry, but not your car collection, Wesley interrupted, his eyes gleaming. It's worth around that much, right? If you sold it. Absolutely not. I cut him off. Those cars are both my passion and part of my business identity. They took me over a decade to acquire and restore. They're just cars. Margaret cried, her voice rising. This is our home. We're talking about a home you couldn't afford. I countered, the anger finally bubbling up. I'm sorry you're in this situation, but selling my collection is not the solution. My father leaned forward, his accountant persona taking over. Be reasonable, Ethan. Cars depreciate. Real estate is an investment. If you help your sister now, you can rebuild your collection later when you're more financially stable. The irony of my father's suddenly considering me financially unstable after years of steady business growth was absolutely not lost on me. My collection has appreciated 20% in 3 years. I informed him, and again, it's part of my business reputation. The conversation devolved from there. Margaret accused me of loving metal and engines more than family. My mother suggested I was being selfish. Wesley muttered something about blood being thicker than motor oil. Finally, my father delivered what he clearly thought was his closing argument. Son, sometimes in life we need to make sacrifices for family. This is one of those times I have made sacrifices, I replied, standing up, my voice shaking with fury. I sacrificed your approval to build my business. I sacrificed financial security in the early years. I've even sacrificed relationships because of my dedication. What I will not sacrifice is everything I have built because Margaret and Wesley bought a house they couldn't afford. As I reached the door, my father's voice turned cold, chilling me to the bone. We'll see about that. At the time, I took it as an empty threat from a disappointed parent. I had no idea what they were already planning. The first hint that something was seriously wrong came 3 weeks after that family meeting. I received a call from my bank asking to verify recent attempts to access my account information. Someone had called multiple times claiming to be me, but had failed the security questions. The bank representative suggested I change all my passwords and place a fraud alert on my credit report, which I did immediately. I assumed it was standard identity theft and filed a police report as a precaution. Then came the mail that changed everything. An official-looking envelope addressed to my parents was mistakenly delivered to my apartment. The return address showed a law firm I didn't recognize. Under normal circumstances, I would have simply readdressed it and put it back in the mail. But something about the timing and my father's parting threat made me intensely uneasy. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a legal petition filed with the county court. The heading read, in the matter of Ethan Walker petition for determination of incapacity and appointment of guardian. My own parents were listed as the petitioners. My hands shook as I read through the document. According to this petition, I was suffering from delusional attachment disorder, compulsive acquisition tendencies, and financial incompetence, masked by temporary business success. The petition cited a lifelong history of mental health challenges and claimed I was unable to make sound financial or personal decisions due to an unhealthy obsession with automobiles. The document included statements from concerned parties who had observed my deteriorating mental state. These parties included my parents, Margaret, Wesley, and 2 family friends who had known me since childhood. One of them, Dr. Lloyd Patterson, was identified as having professional concerns about my mental health, even though he had never treated me and his medical specialty was Pediatric cardiology. Most disturbing were the attached photographs clearly selected and possibly manipulated to support their narrative. One showed me looking disheveled after a 72-hour restoration marathon before a major show, described as evidence of mania. Another captured me in an animated discussion with a client. My hand gestures made to look aggressive rather than simply enthusiastically. There was even a photo of my apartment focusing on the car. Diagrams and blueprints on my walls described in the caption as evidence of obsessive thought patterns. The final page revealed their true horrifying motivation. If granted guardianship, my parents would have complete control over my assets, including the authority to liquidate holdings for the protected person's best interests. They had even included a proposed financial rehabilitation plan that specifically mentioned selling my excessive vehicle collection to create a more balanced investment portfolio. My stomach churned and a cold dread spread through me as the full picture became sickeningly clear. This wasn't just a family disagreement. This was a calculated legal attack on my autonomy designed to seize control of the assets I had spent my adult life building. And it was coming from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I later discovered they had even hired Stanley Greaves, a private investigator with questionable ethics, to follow me for 2 weeks. His surveillance report described my regular 14-hour workdays as manic episodes and my careful inspection of vehicle components as obsessive behaviors. Conversations with clients were characterized as intense and concerning interactions. When I finally called my parents to confront them, my mother answered with a prepared artificial calm that suggested she'd been expecting my call. "Ethan, honey, we're just worried about you," she said, her voice artificially soothing. "This intervention is for your own good intervention." I was shouting now, pacing my apartment, my hands clenching. "You were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. You are lying to a court about my mental health, so you can't steal my cars." "See," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "This is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction we're concerned about. Your attachment to those objects is not healthy. Once you're better, you'll thank us." My father took the phone. "Son, we've been watching your obsession with cars, bro. From childhood. It has prevented you from having a normal life. Relationships, a family. This is not about the money or the cars. It's about getting you help. If it's not about the money, then why does your petition specifically outline selling my collection?" I challenged, my voice cracking with disbelief. It was a pause before he answered, "Because those vehicles are the physical manifestation of your disorder. Removing them is therapeutic according to the specialists we've consulted." "What specialists?" I demanded. The petition mentions Dr. Patterson, who is a pediatric cardiologist, not a psychiatrist. "There are others," he insisted. "Dr. Mason has had concerns since you were a teenager." Dr. Mason. The name triggered a distant, unsettling memory. My parents had taken me to see him 3 or 4 times when I was 15, claiming it was for career aptitude testing after I'd expressed interest in automotive design rather than accounting like my father. The sessions had been strange, with lots of questions about my fixation on cars. Dr. Mason wasn't a real therapist, was he? I asked, a cold realization dawn. My father cleared his throat. "He has extensive experience with trouble young people." The conversation deteriorated from there. My mother cried about how they just wanted their real son back. My father insisted this was tough love, necessary for my long-term well-being. Neither would acknowledge the truth. This was about getting my money to save Margaret from her financial mistakes. After hanging up, I experienced what I later recognized as a full-blown panic attack. For 30 minutes, I couldn't catch my breath, absolutely convinced my life was collapsing around me. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, so utterly insidious that it seemed unreal. The people who had raised me were now trying to legally strip me of my agency as an adult. They were willing to brand me as mentally incompetent, potentially impacting my business reputation and future, all to solve Margaret's housing crisis. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing through options and implications. By morning, I knew I needed professional help. Not the kind my parents thought I needed, but legal representation from someone who understood guardianship law. My family had declared war on my independence, and I needed to defend myself. The morning after discovering the petition, I called Every law firm in Detroit that specialized in probate and guardianship law. Most couldn't see me for weeks, and those who could seemed hesitant once I explained the situation. Family guardianship cases were apparently messy, and many lawyers preferred to avoid them. On my seventh call, the receptionist at Winters Legal Group heard enough to put me through directly to Jessica Winters herself. "Mr. Walker," she said, after I'd explained my situation, "what your family is attempting is troubling, but unfortunately not uncommon. Guardianship laws designed to protect vulnerable adults are increasingly being weaponized in family financial disputes." We scheduled an appointment for that very afternoon. Jessica's office was modest, but professional, with credentials covering one wall and family photos on another. She was perhaps 50 with sharp, assessing eyes. The first thing she said after reviewing the petition copy sent a chill down my spine. "This is a serious legal matter. If your parents succeed, you would lose not just control of your assets, but your civil rights. You could not enter contracts, make medical decisions, or even decide where to live without your guardian's approval. Can they really do this?" I asked, my voice tight. "I run a successful business. I've never been diagnosed with any mental health condition." "They can try," she replied. "And unfortunately, once these proceedings begin, the burden often falls on the alleged incapacitated person to prove competence rather than the other way around." But then, seeing my expression, she added, "However, we have several factors in our favor. Your business success demonstrates executive function and competence. We need to build a comprehensive defense." Immediately, Jessica outlined a multifaceted strategy. Gather all my business records showing consistent growth and sound management. Secure affidavit from clients, suppliers, and industry colleagues. Arrange for an independent psychological evaluation before the court-ordered one. Investigate the credentials of this specialist my parents claimed supported their petition. Also, she added, her voice firm, secure your vehicles immediately. Move them somewhere your family doesn't know about. Once guardianship proceedings begin, the court might freeze your assets. I spent the next 3 days executing Jessica's plan with a desperate urgency. I moved my collection to a secure storage facility under corporate ownership, making it harder to trace. I gathered 5 years of business records showing steady growth, client testimonials praising my work, and even awards my restorations had won at regional car shows. Unexpected support came from my father's brother, Uncle Robert. When I hesitantly reached out, wondering if he might have insights into my parents' thinking, he immediately asked to me at a diner outside the city. "I've been waiting for something like this," he said gravely once we were seated in a corner booth. "Your father tried similar tactics with our mother when she wouldn't sell her lake house property to fund his accounting practice 30 years ago." I was stunned. "He tried to have Grandma declared incompetent." Uncle Robert nodded, claimed her refusal to sell was evidence of diminished capacity. The family stopped it, but Richard never forgave us for interfering. We've barely spoken since. He shared documents from that time showing disturbing parallels to my situation. More importantly, he revealed that Dr. Mason, the supposed therapist I had seen as a teenager, was actually a former college roommate of my father's with a bachelor's degree in psychology, but no clinical license. They used those sessions to build a history of mental health concerns, he explained. Richard has always played the long game. This revelation made me question other aspects of my childhood. Had certain episodes been manufactured or exaggerated to establish a pattern? I recall being taken to a hospital after staying up for 36 hours working on a model car competition entry at 16. My parents had told relatives I had experienced a manic episode, when in reality, I had simply been an enthusiastic teenager missing sleep to finish a project. Another surprising ally emerged when my ex-girlfriend Amber contacted me after hearing rumors about the case. We had dated for 2 years before parting amicably when her job took her to California. During our relationship, my parents had constantly tried to convince her I was emotionally unavailable and fixated on cars rather than building a future. "They once took me to lunch without you," she revealed on our call, and suggested I keep a journal of her concerning behaviors to help build a case for intervention. I thought they were just being overprotective, but now Amber agreed to provide a written statement about these conversations. documenting my parents' long-standing attempts to pathologize my passion for automobiles and restoration. While building my defense, I also learned more about the legal process ahead. The court would appoint a guardian ad pendent investigator to evaluate the claims in the petition. There would be psychological evaluations, interviews with the petitioners, the alleged incapacitated person, that was me, and eventually a hearing where a judge would make the final determination. Jessica advised me to continue running my business normally while preparing for the hearing. The worst thing you could do is act erratically or make sudden financial moves. She explained, even selling your collection now could be twisted to support their narrative that you make impulsive decisions. I followed her advice, though it was increasingly difficult to focus on work, knowing my parents were actively trying to strip me of my rights. Each morning, I checked my calendar, financial accounts, and business records, documenting everything meticulously for our defense. 2 weeks into preparation, Jessica called with troubling news. Your parents have filed it. Emergency motion for temporary guardianship, pending the full hearing. They're claiming your knowledge of the petition has triggered erratic behavior. That poses immediate risk to your assets. What erratic behavior? I demand it. My blood running cold. I've been doing everything normally except securing my property. They're citing the movement of your vehicles as evidence. You're hiding assets, Jessica explained, and claimed you've been making threatening calls to family members. The only calls I had made were the initial confrontation with my parents and a brief, tense conversation with Margaret where I had simply asked why she was supporting this action. Both had been emotional, yes, but hardly threatening. This is a common tactic, Jessica explained. They're trying to get temporary control quickly before we can present our full case. We need to be in court tomorrow morning to oppose this emergency motion. That night, I hardly slept, mentally preparing to face my family in court for the first time. The betrayal that had felt abstract when reading legal documents was about to become painfully, humiliatingly real. The courtroom felt unnaturally cold as I sat beside Jessica, watching my parents and sister enter with their attorney. They avoided eye contact, taking seats across the aisle as if we were strangers rather than family. Their lawyer, Martin Blackwell, had a reputation for aggressive guardianship cases, particularly those involving substantial assets. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a veteran of the probate court, reviewed the emergency motion wildly. Room remained silent. When she looked up, her expression was skeptical. Mr. Blackwell, your emergency motion cites immediate danger to assets, but provides limited specific evidence. Can't you elaborate? Blackwell rose smoothly. Your Honor, since becoming aware of the guardianship petition, Mr. Walker has moved his entire vehicle collection worth nearly $500,000 to an undisclosed location. This demonstrates exactly the impulsive, secretive behavior outlined in our petition and raises concerns about asset dissipation before the court can rule on guardianship. Jessica countered. Your Honor, my client moved his legally owned property to secure storage after discovering his family was attempting to seize control of his assets with the explicit goal of liquidating them. This was a rational protective measure, not evidence of incapacity. The judge turned to me. Mr. Walker, are these vehicles still in your possession, or have you sold or encumbered them? They are still mine, Your Honor. I answered, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I simply moved them to prevent potential interference before this matter is resolved. I can provide documentation of their current secure storage. After hearing arguments from both sides, Judge Simmons denied the emergency motion, but ordered an expedited process for the main guardianship petition, including an independent psychiatric evaluation within 10 days. She also appointed Andrea Holden as guardian ad litem to investigate the case and provide recommendations to the court. Until this matter is resolved, the judge concluded, Mr. Walker shall maintain his assets in their current state with no sales for transfers of the vehicles in question. It was a small victory, a temporary reprieve, but the accelerated timeline meant we had even less time to prepare our full defense. As we left the courtroom, I caught Margaret whispering to our mother, both glancing at me with expressions mixing anger and something that looked almost like pity. The court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Harmon, had an office in a modern medical holding downtown. Her evaluation would be crucial to the case, and Jessica had prepared it extensively for the types of questions and assessments to expect. Be yourself, she advised. Don't try to hide your passion for cars and restoration, but articulate how it functions as both a business and a personal interest. Demonstrate your clear understanding of finances, relationships, and daily living responsibilities. The evaluation lasted nearly 4 hours across 2 sessions. Dr. Harmon was thorough but fair, asking about my childhood, education, business, development, and relationships. She administered standardized cognitive tests and interviewed me about my decision-making processes for both personal and business matters. When she asked about my car collection, I explained the business rationale. Each vehicle in my collection serves multiple purposes. I told her, they are appreciating assets, advertisements for my restoration, skills, and teaching tools for my apprentices. I can demonstrate the return on investment for each acquisition and restoration. Dr. Harmon seemed particularly interested in my awareness of how others perceive my interest in cars. Your parents described your relationship with these vehicles as obsessive and all-consuming. How would you respond to that characterization? I am passionate, not obsessive, I replied carefully. I run a successful business that requires deep knowledge and enthusiasm. Outside of work, I maintain friendships, pursue other interests like hiking and photography, and handle my personal responsibilities. The difference is that my parents have never valued my chosen field. So they pathized the dedication that would be praised in a surgeon or attorney. While awaiting Dr. Harmon's report concerning developments emerged on multiple fronts. Several clients called to postpone projects, mentioning they had received concerning information about my business stability. One directly referenced a call from someone claiming to be a family member worried about my mental health. Jessica immediately filed a motion to prohibit my parents from interfering with my business, but the damage was already spreading. Industry colleagues began treating me differently. At a regional auto show, some even avoided me. Altogether, the Whisper campaign was working. More alarmingly, Margaret's husband, Wesley, was spotted near my business after hours by my security system. The footage showed him examining the building's access points and taking photos. When confronted by my attorney, my parents' lawyer claimed Wesley was concerned about business assets that might soon be under guardianship management. The most disturbing discovery came when my mechanic found a tracking device magnetically attached to the undercarriage of my daily driver. The device was registered to Stanley Greaves Investigations, the same firm my parents had hired. Jessica immediately filed police reports for stalking and potential harassment, adding these incidents to our growing defense file. The pressure extended beyond legal channels. Extended family members began calling, urging me to cooperate for everyone's sake. Most had heard a carefully crafted version of events where my parents were acting out of loving concern rather than financial motivation. My cousin Alice had initially warned me about Margaret's financial troubles stopped returning my autograph, what she described as an intense family meeting where she was told not to interfere. 2 days before the final hearing, a local news blog published a story titled, Family Fee Over Fortunate Classic Cars, which contained numerous inaccuracies and quotes from anonymous family sources, claiming I had a history of mental instability masked by business success, though not a major outlet. The article began circulating in car collector circles, potentially damaging my professional reputation even further. The night before the hearing, my security system alerted me to movement at my storage facility. The cameras captured Wesley and another man attempting to access the building where my collection was kept. They left when security responded, but their intention was clear. They had been trying to locate or access my vehicles before the court ruling. This final incident strengthened our case, demonstrating beyond a shadow of a doubt the true motives behind the guardianship petition. Jessica added the security footage to our evidence marmons. Completed evaluation which found no evidence of mental incapacity and specifically noted my detailed understanding of business finances and rational decision-making processes regarding asset management. As I prepared for the hearing that would determine my future, I felt a strange calm replacing the panic and betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming that this was not about my mental health, but about my family's desperate attempt to solve Margaret's financial problems by seizing control of my assets. Now I just needed the court to see the truth. The day of the hearing arrived with a sense of finality. The courtroom was more crowded than for the emergency motion, with extended family members filling several rows. Some nodded encouragingly to me, while others sat firmly behind my parents. The family literally divided by the center aisle. Judge Simmons entered and reviewed the substantial case file that had developed. Over the past weeks, guardian ad litem Andrea Holden sat at a separate table for investigation. Reports sealed until this moment. This is a final hearing to determine whether guardianship is warranted for Ethan Walker, the judge began. I will hear evidence from both parties, review the professional evaluations, and make a determination based on a clear and convincing evidence standard. Martin Blackwell presented the petitioner's case, first painting me as a troubled individual whose car obsession had evolved from childhood fixation to adult dysfunction. He called my father as his first witness, Richard Walker. How long have you been concerned about your son's mental state? Blackwell asked. My father, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, leaned toward the microphone. Since he was about 12 years old, what started as a normal boy's interest in cars became increasingly concerning. He would become agitated if his model cars were moved even slightly. By 16, he was skipping social events to work on car projects, showing signs of isolation and obsessive behaviors. And in recent years, his condition has worsened. He lives alone, works excessive hours, and has invested nearly all his resources into these vehicles rather than a home or retirement. When we expressed concern, he became hostile and defensive. Classic signs of someone unable to recognize their own impaired judgment. Jessica's cross-examination was precise and devastating. Mr. Walker, is it true that you attempted similar legal action against your own mother 30 years ago when she refused to sell property to fund your business? My father's face tightened. That was a completely different situation. Different how? Mr. Walker, were you not trying to have your mother declared incompetent to gain control of her lake house property? Objection. Blackwell interjected. Relevance. I will allow it. Judge Simmons ruled the petitioner's history with similar proceedings is relevant to credibility. My father was forced to acknowledge the previous attempt, though he insisted the circumstances were entirely different. His discomfort was visible as Jessica methodically dismantled his narrative. Mr. Walker, in the financial rehabilitation plan included with your petition, you specifically mentioned selling your son's vehicle collection. What would happen to those funds? They would be invested appropriately for Ethan's future, he said, his voice still. Jessica presented a document. Your daughter Margaret and her husband are facing foreclosure on a home, requiring approximately $400,000 to retain. Correct. That is a separate family matter, my father replied stiffly. A separate matter that coincidentally requires almost exactly the appraised value of your son's car collection. The porch room buzzed with quiet murmurs. My mother testified. Next, her presentation more emotional. She described fearfully how she had lost her son to his obsession and just wanted to help him live a normal life. When Jessica questioned her about Dr. Mason, the unlicensed therapist from my teenage years, her testimony became contradictory and evasive. You testified that Dr. Mason diagnosed Ethan with obsessive tendencies at age 15, but records show Dr. Mason has never held a clinical license in this state. Was this an intentional misrepresentation to the court? My mother looked to Blackwell for help, but there was none to offer. We believed he was qualified, she finally answered, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret's testimony proved even more problematic for their case. Under questioning about the timing of the guardianship petition, she inadvertently revealed the direct connection to her housing situation. We tried asking him directly to help with our mortgage situation by selling just 1 or 2 cars, but he refused. That's when we realized how irrational he had become about these objects. So, the petition came after he refused to sell his property to solve your financial problems, Miss Armstrong. Jessica clarified. Well, yes, but that just demonstrated his problem. Margaret insisted, her voice rising in desperation. What kind of person chooses cars over helping his sister keep her home? When pressed about her own financial decisions, Margaret became defensive and eventually broke down, admitting they had purchased their home knowing it exceeded their budget because they expected significant commission increases that never materialized. Dr. Harmon's testimony followed, presenting her professional assessment. I found Mr. Walker to be fully oriented, rational, and competent in all cognitive and executive function assessments. His interest in vintage automobiles, while passionate, does not impair his judgment or functioning. In fact, he has channeled this interest into a successful business, showing considerable financial acumen. She directly addressed the claims in the petition. What his family characterizes as obsession appears to be specialized professional knowledge. Enthusiasm. Mr. Walker maintains appropriate boundaries between his business interests and other life aspects. I found no clinical evidence supporting the need for guardianship. Andrea Holden, the guardian ad litem, presented similar conclusions. After thorough investigation, including interviews with business associates, clients, and friends of Mr. Walker, I found consistent evidence of competent decision-making, successful business management, and appropriate social function. Most damaging to my parents' case was her assessment of their motives. There appears to be significant financial motivation behind this petition, specifically related to the petitioner's daughter's property foreclosure. Evidence suggests the primary goal is gaining control of Mr. Walker's assets rather than concern for his welfare. My Uncle Robert's testimony about the previous guardianship attempt against my grandmother further undermined my parents' credibility. Richard has always used whatever means necessary to control family resources to testify. When conventional pressure fails, he resorts to more extreme measures, including weaponizing guardianship laws. When my turn came to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. I described building my business from nothing, the careful research behind each vehicle acquisition, and my business plan show projected growth and succession planning. These cars are not just possessions. I explain they represent my business reputation, my expertise, and yes, my passion, but passion is not pathology. Every restoration teaches me something new that improves my craft. Every vehicle in my collection was acquired through careful consideration of its historical significance, restoration potential, and investment value. I addressed the court directly for my closing statement. Your Honor, my parents raised me to be independent and self-sufficient, then attempted to strip me of that independence when I succeeded on my own terms rather than theirs. They have manufactured concerns about my mental health to gain control of assets I built without their support or approval. This petition is not about protecting me, but about forcing me to solve my sister's financial problems by liquidating what I have spent my adult life building. After final arguments from both attorneys, Judge Simmons called a 1-hour recess to review all evidence before rendering her decision. That hour felt eternal as I sat in the hallway, avoiding eye contact with family members passing by. When court reconvened, Judge Simmons delivered her ruling with clear conviction. Having reviewed all testimony, professional evaluations, and evidence presented, I find no clear and convincing evidence that Ethan Walker lacks the capacity to manage his person or property. The petition for guardianship is denied. She continued with unexpected force. Furthermore, I find disturbing evidence that this petition was filed with improper financial motivation rather than genuine concern for Mr. Walker's welfare. The manipulation of guardianship proceedings for financial gain is a serious matter. She ordered my parents to pay all court costs and my legal fees and referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential investigation into perjury charges regarding them. Misrepresentation of Dr. Mason's credentials. This court will not be used as a tool to seize control of legally acquired assets from a competent adult, she concluded firmly. The gavel sounded, a stark final thud marking the end of the nightmare that had consumed my life for weeks. My parents sat stunned while Margaret buried her face in her hands. As people began filing out, Jessica squeezed my shoulder. Congratulations. Your independence is officially intact. I nodded, feeling not triumph, but a profound sadness beneath the immense relief. I had won my freedom, but lost my family in the process. The days following the court victory were strangely hollow. My legal status was secure, my assets protected, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. My parents made several attempts to contact me, leaving voicemails that ranged from defensive justifications to tearful pleas, without ever offering a genuine apology or acknowledgement of what they had done. "Ethan, we only wanted what was best for you," my mother claimed in one message. "We still think you need help, but we respect the court's decision." Margaret's approach was even more tone-deaf. "I hope you're happy now that Wesley and I will lose our home. Family is supposed to help each other." After consulting with Jessica, I filed for a restraining order against my immediate family. The judge granted it based on the surveillance evidence, tracking device, and attempted access to my storage facility. The order prevented them from coming near my home, business, or contacting me directly for 6 months. 2 weeks after the hearing, Margaret and Wesley's house officially went into foreclosure. They moved into my parents' guest room, according to Uncle Robert, who had become my primary link to family news. The irony was not lost on me that their solution had always been available: downsizing to a home they could actually afford, but they had tried to appropriate my assets instead. Rebuilding my business reputation became my primary focus. The local news blog article had done some damage in collector circles, with potential clients asking pointed questions about my stability. I addressed this head-on, sharing court documents, confirming my competence with key industry contacts, and being transparent about the failed guardianship attempt when necessary. My family tried to have me declared incompetent to gain control of my assets. I would explain simply: the court found zero evidence supporting their claims and dismissed the case entirely. Most people were sympathetic, many sharing their own stories of family conflicts over money. By summer, my client list hadn't largely recovered, with several major restoration projects contracted. Through the following year, I'd expanded my workshop space and hired 2 additional specialists to handle the increased demand. The emotional healing proved far more challenging than the professional recovery. I began working with Dr. Lena Capper, a licensed therapist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions focused on processing the betrayal without letting it define me. What your family did was about them, not you. She emphasized in our 3rd session their willingness to pathize your passion reflects their own issues with control and entitlement. Through therapy, I uncovered how many of my childhood memories had been shaped by my parents' narrative that my interest in cars was somehow problematic rather than simply different from their expectations. Dr. Capper helped me recognize that what they had labeled as obsession was actually focused passion, attention to detail, and specialized knowledge, all qualities that made me successful in my chosen field. My support network expanded beyond professional connections. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia invited me for Sunday dinners, introducing me to cousins I had rarely seen at family gatherings. Alice eventually reached out to apologize for her silence during the court proceedings, explaining the intense pressure she had faced from my parents. "They told everyone you were having a breakdown and needed intervention," she explained. "Over only those of us who knew you well recognized it for what it was, a cash grab disguised as concern." As my restraining order neared expiration, I made a deliberate choice not to renew it, but maintain my distance through clear boundaries. When my father attempted to arrange a meeting to breathe the air, I declined, through my attorney explaining I would consider reconciliation only after genuine acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. I don't expect them to fully understand why their actions were so devastating, I told Dr. Kapoor, but I need some recognition that they violated my trust in a fundamental way. That acknowledgement never came. Instead, my parents and Margaret crafted a revised narrative where they had been motivated by genuine concern, and I had simply overreacted to their well-intentioned intervention. This version spread through extended family, creating uncomfortable dynamics at weddings and funerals, where our paths occasionally crossed. 6 months after the court ruling, I made a symbolic decision to add a new vehicle to my collection, a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air that required extensive restoration. I had admired this model since childhood, but had never found the right project at the right time. Working on it became a form of therapy, each restored component representing another step in rebuilding my sense of security and autonomy. The experience also inspired me to establish the Walker Autonomy Foundation, a small nonprofit providing legal assistance to adults facing unwarranted guardianship petitions. Working with Jessica, We created resources explaining guardianship laws and rights, focusing particularly on cases where financial motives might be disguised as concern. These laws exist to protect vulnerable adults, Jessica explained at our first fundraising event, but they can be weaponized by those seeking control of assets. Our goal is to ensure the system works as intended, protecting those who truly need protection while respecting the autonomy of capable adults. A year after the court ruling, my business was thriving beyond pre-petition levels. The publicity had unexpectedly raised my profile in restoration circles with several articles in industry publications featuring my work. I had expanded my workshop space and hired 2 additional specialists to handle increased demand. My personal life also evolved in positive directions through a classic car event in Chicago. I met Sophia, an automotive engineer who shared my passion for vintage designs. Our relationship developed naturally without the pressure my parents had always placed on my romantic connections. She understood my work schedule, often collaborated on technical challenges in my restoration projects. When I eventually shared the full story of my family's guardianship attempt, Sophia's response was exactly what I needed. They tried to pathize your passion because they couldn't control it, she said, gesturing around my workshop. But that passion created all this. Never apologize for loving what you do. 2 years after the court case, I received an unexpected letter from my father. Unlike previous communications, this one contained no justifications or revisionist history. Instead, he wrote simply, "I was wrong. What we did was unforgivable. I do not expect your forgiveness, but you deserve this acknowledgement." Whether this represented genuine growth or was prompted by some external factor, I couldn't know. I chose not to respond immediately. Discussing the letter with Dr. Capper first. Forgiveness is your choice, not your obligation, she reminded me. And reconciliation, if you ever wanted, would require much more than one letter. I eventually wrote back with my own simple message. Thank you for acknowledging the harm. I am not ready for contact, but this letter matters. It was a small step, but an honest one. The complete fracturing of my family remained one of the painful consequences of their actions. But I have built a new life with chosen family and reclaimed my narrative on my own terms. Looking back at the entire experience now, I recognize that what my parents tried to take from me went far beyond 5 cars worth $450,000. They attempted to seize my autonomy, my reputation, and my very right to define my own path. In fighting for my legal freedom, I also secured something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that I could face betrayal from those closest to me and emerge stronger, wiser, and still capable of trust and connection. The irony is that in trying to control me through claims of mental incompetence, my family forced me to develop greater emotional intelligence and self-awareness than I might have otherwise achieved. Their betrayal, though painful, ultimately failed to define me. For anyone watching who has faced similar family betrayal or attempts to control your life path, remember that your passion is not pathology. Your differences are not defects, and your right to self-determination is worth fighting. Have you ever had family members try to control your life choices or assets? Drop a comment below sharing your experience and how you handled it. Hit like if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life experiences of overcoming family betrayal, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing your ground can lead to healing even when the people who should support you try to take everything away. Thank you for watching, and remember, your life belongs to you, not to those who claim to know what's best for